Well, you just never know what we're going to see here, and we never know either until we pick it up along the way. This is our monthly listing of 20 items on eBay. I really enjoy doing this because all month long I salt away a few little things from various collections that come my way, or stuff I think is interesting, things we haven't necessarily talked about before, and do a little deeper dive. So let's go, because we've got some cool stuff this month. Last month we showed a lot of 1940s, 50s era kitchen and kitsch, and it did very well. And I had put this back because I wanted to do a little more research and make sure that it was right, and it is. This is the Tortoise and the Hare Salt and Pepper Shaker by a very good company in California, a small operation, but a very well-crafted operation. The wares of Bologna Star. Bologna Star seems like a strange name, and it is. It is a composite of 3 people. The founders were Everett and Leona Frost and their partner, Valeria de Marsa. And so they took little pieces of their names. Valeria was the VAL, Leona was the ONA, and Everett's middle name was Star, and that is how they got Bologna Star. They all worked together at Security Pacific Bank in Los Angeles in the Depression years, and they thought, you know, California pottery is starting to be really popular, and we should be making this and selling it to all these gift shops who couldn't get pottery from Japan and Germany anymore. And they saw the opportunity, along with about 2,000 other California pottery company makers. They knew some people, they could get some financing. The Frosts also conveniently had a son who was a chemist and knew how to make glazes that would not crackle. That was a big plus for them. They made things that were cute and fun, but they were a little better quality than a lot of the other California pottery companies at the time. Like Treasure Craft, they were one of the first to do the themed sets of salt and pepper shakers. This is from the Nursery Rhymes series, and this came out about 1950. There are 2 versions. There is a rabbit who is on all 4s and has his eyes closed and his head down, and then there's this guy who's even lazier looking, sleeping on his back. This is type 2. These were only made from 1950 until 53, because by 1953, the writing was on the wall for most of the California pottery companies. Japan and Germany were both sending ceramics back. Japan was way undercutting our market, and they just couldn't compete anymore. They sold some of their molds to Gilner, so you will occasionally see a Gilner mold mark on a Bologna Star blank, and you will occasionally on the larger pieces see a Bologna Star signature, but on the little pieces you don't. And that's why so often this particular set is not identified as a set. People who collected salt and pepper shaker sets, they tended to collect a lot. I'm actually going tomorrow to pick up 5 boxes full of salt and pepper shakers. I believe there are 1,000 pieces in the collection. And so for the people who weren't the collectors who inherited these collections, they didn't necessarily know what went with what, and a lot of them, they just thought, oh, it's a single, and they tossed it. The value on this particular set can typically run about $35 now. We're going to start at a lot less than that, and we will see where it goes on eBay. We are going to start listing this right now. And if you are one of our members on the level 2 or 3 level, you are getting early access to this video, so you can go right to eBay, follow the links in the description below. Now, if you are not a level 2 or 3 member, we roll this out to everybody after they've had a few days to look things over, so then it's open game for everybody, and you can follow those links as well. If items have sold, you'll get an idea of what the market is right now for these things on eBay, and if they haven't sold, you are welcome to bid as well. I got a box full of little playing cards, and almost all of them were really not anything terribly interesting. They were modern, they were cruise ships, they were just things people picked up. But this one jumped right out at me, because this foil design here shows the Trilon and Perisphere, and that makes it a souvenir of the 1939 to 1940 World's Fair. And this particular deck features the World of Tomorrow, which is one of the biggest attractions at the World's Fair. It was supposed to show how people would live in the future. And they got a certain part of it right. They predicted things like television. They predicted streamlined design. They predicted big skyscrapers in cities all over the world. And those things definitely did happen, as well as some transportation ideas that were novel. The cards are in good shape, and the cards appear to be complete including the Joker. This is important because there was a period of time where it became popular because playing cards were something that were giveaways and promotions in many instances, and not very expensive in any instance, that people started collecting just the Jokers out of these sets. And so lots of sets are missing their Jokers, and that's important. Decorated with various scenes of New York, the fair, and also the New York City itself. There's Midtown and the East River. The Ace of Spades shows this wonderful streamlined deco sculpture that was at the World's Fair called Speed. The George Washington Bridge, which was one of the new wonders of New York at the time. The Woolworth Building, which on its completion was briefly the tallest building in the world. So it's a really fun look at New York and the fair 85 years ago when it was actually happening. And I just think that is the coolest thing. Somebody who is a World's Fair fan or a New York City lover will really enjoy going through and seeing all of these scenes. The condition overall is good. It has the foil box. The foil box is in great condition on the top and just a little bit of wear around the edges, and a little bit of writing in the middle of it, so full disclosure. But the cards on the interior are in great shape, and I like anything World's Fair because it's just such a snapshot of people, the way people were actually living at a time, but also their aspiration for how they wanted to live in the future. This is going to start at $9.99. They typically sell for between $20 and $30. I thought it was time to talk about a particularly nice American jewelry maker called Florenza. Florenza sounds Italian, but it was actually made for the New York market and was sold by stores like Bonwit Teller. They also did pieces for Revlon and Estee Lauder, solid perfumes and things. They started in the 1940s, but the Florenza name did not come about until about 1950 when the founder decided to rename the company after his mother Florence. And it sounded Italian, and it sounded like it was something very nice, and it is. Because if you look at those stones, those are actually opals as well as rhinestones. So they actually use some semi-precious stones as well. Jeweling and very encrusted designs were really their hallmark, and they peaked in popularity probably in the late 60s and early 70s. They did everything from dresser jars and lipstick holders to lots of different jewelry. I have not seen this particular piece before, even though I've handled a lot of Florenza over the years. This was new to me, and I thought it was very nice. Florenza's popularity continued through the 1970s. The son took over the firm, and they were preparing a new line in 1981 when he was involved in a terrible car crash. And it took him a long time to recover. And unfortunately, the firm closed its doors before it was ever able to release that new line, which would probably have propelled them to another 10 or 20 years of production. But as a result, Florenza was gone by the early 1980s, and people started recognizing it as collectible almost right away. There's the Florenza mark on the back. So look for Florenza pieces. They did a number of different finishes. It's not just gold tone, although the gold tone's very nice on this. I think this is going to be a popular piece. Usually at retail, I would price this around $50 to $65. Signed costume jewelry and anything with real semi-precious stones in signed costume jewelry is very popular right now. I think it has some potential. It might even go beyond what I'm thinking. So this one is not going to be on a buy it now. We're going to put it out at a low price and let people bid it up to where the value should be currently. I put a couple of pieces of Fenton on last month, and they did very well. They were very pretty pieces from the artware lines, and another one came my way. And it's unusual for a few different reasons, so I decided that we're going to list this one. This will be our only Fenton offering this month. We have a couple of pieces of art glass, and what they have in common is a carnival iridescent finish. Carnival glass is made by using various metallic oxides and spraying the exterior of the piece as it's cooling. So they wait until it cools down to about 150 or 200 degrees, then they put the carnival finish on, and that is the point at which you get this color, which is why it's important never to use Windex or heavy scrubbers on your carnival glass. This, I think, is really fun. These veil tails under the water lilies. I thought they were really, really pretty, and there's a couple of other things about this that are kind of unusual. It's a cobalt base. When you talk about carnival glass, there's two colors, the color of the glass itself and then the color of the iridescence on the glass. The iridescence has a very greenish cast, but if you look in there, you see we are looking at cobalt. You have to look in the bottom to really see the blue because it looks dark the way that it shows up in these lights. It's got just a little bit of a factory flaw on the edge there. That did not bother them enough to stop from producing and painting it, but it did stop them from actually marking it as a Fenton piece. So the way we know it's a Fenton piece is because it's got the hand painted by D. Anderson. D. Anderson was Dan Anderson. He and his wife worked in their decorating department in the 1970s through the late 90s. And this would have been near the very end of Anderson's work there. And he had become enough of a master decorator that they assigned him to do some of these more special, large, fancy artware pieces. If you'd been on the line a long time and you had a certain level of skill, then you got to do these unusual things. And this one is not the only one of this line ever made, but it's a very limited line and something that we really don't see very much with any artist's signature. So I just thought it was something really different, and I wanted to bring it to you. We are going to start this at $79. I believe the real value of it is probably 2 to 3 times that much potentially. It's got an interesting story, and we're going to see how the glass collectors respond to it. You know, if there's a hat around, I'm likely to put it on, and this one is a different kind of hat because this is a miner's helmet, and it's a real one. It actually belonged to Zeno's grandfather, and was from a mine in western Kentucky where he started work in 1962, and this was the first one they issued him, so we know exactly the date on this. He worked for the P&M, and Be Careful Buddy was the sign on the front, because by this time, mining safety and standards had really improved a lot. And the idea was that the helmet was not just for you, it was also to remind the people around you to use caution in what they were doing. This has had a little bit of wear. Something landed on it at one time. That's the reason you wear a hard hat. So it's got one little dent. Overall, the condition's pretty good. And all of the strapping and everything is in great shape. It's got a mark with the patent dates on it. The patent dates equate to the 1940s and early 50s, but this same design was made for a while, and it was made by this company that you see on the underside of the brim, B.F. McDonald Company in Los Angeles. The logo is in good shape. I just thought it was a pretty neat piece. And typically when I see these kind of miners' helmets, they usually are selling between about $50 and $75 when they have these kind of logos and all the stickers and everything on it. So I thought this one was pretty cool. We know it's genuine. We know where it came from. And so we are going to start it off at a lower price and then put a buy it now on it and see who takes interest in it, because there are a lot of people who collect mining related collectibles. In fact, there are a lot of people who collect occupational collectibles of all sorts. It may be because they had somebody in the family who worked on the railroad, or somebody who worked in medicine, or somebody who worked in a coal mine. And that gets people interested in putting together vignettes in honor of their ancestors. The family did keep some other pieces of his, but he had one other helmet that they decided they liked better. And so this one is ready to go. And Bill, we miss you, but we will send this along to somebody who will preserve it in your memory. We actually have a few things that came from various relatives this month, and this one was part of my mother's collection. The Little Folks of Animal Land. I remember being quite fascinated by this when she got it. I remember as a child she had one other book of this series, which unfortunately is long gone. I wish I knew what happened to that one, because that one I would have kept because I read it as a child. This one she got when I was an adult, and it is very cute. Look at them in their little hot air balloon. The Little Folks of Animal Land was by this fellow here, Harry Whittier Freeze. And Harry Whittier Freeze, even though he made great pains in the introduction to explain what he had done, got a lot of flack for this at first, because people were convinced that he had to have tortured and abused these animals. First, there was a rumor that he had euthanized them all and then posed them, which was absolutely not true. Then there was a rumor that he must have been very cruel to them, but he made a great point right in the front to say in his introductory note that they were photographed from living animals and that the difficulties encountered in posing kittens and puppies for pictures of this kind have been overcome only by the exercise of great patience and invariable kindness. So he's telling you right there that he was nice to the animals and he got them to do these crazy things and dress up and have all these stories told about them. This is a first edition, published in 1915. There's the information there. It's in good shape overall. When we look at books, there's certain things we look for. Is the spine cracked? In this case, yes, it is. And that means that it's been bent back so far that it's a little bit loose on the front. It's not going to come off or anything. It just means that it's being held together by the papers that put it together as opposed to being a very, very solid, unopened copy. The next thing we look for is the illustrations, especially with children's books. You have to make sure they haven't been written in. This one has not. We don't see any tears or missing things, but it's very sweet, and they show the animals doing all sorts of things, and they make all sorts of stories out of them. So chapter 26 is good luck. The Keen Nose Boys make a sly deal, and there's the Keen Nose Boys with their fish. It took him months and months, as I understand, just to do the photography for this. It's a very sweet little book. And here we have a daring rescue where someone's doll has rescued this poor kitten in a dream. So it's just really sweet. It's very evocative of century-ago children's books. It's a large tome, so there's actually a lot of fun reading in here. And it goes all the way to the very end when there's a wonderful grand wedding. So whoever gets this is going to have a lot of fun with it. These typically are selling somewhere in the $125 range in this condition because they are scarce as hardcover. It's scarce as a first edition, and the condition of this overall actually is very good. There's just a little bumping, as they call it, on the top of the spine. These are some good terms to know if you're selling books. Bumping at the spine, bumping at the corners, cracked spines, those sorts of things are things that you want to include in condition descriptions when you're dealing with book collectors, because they understand those things and those are the terms they use and they expect that from you too. So it's a really neat book and I hope somebody really enjoys it. And by the way, if you're concerned that, gosh, I missed out on something that I saw here because I'm not a member and I don't get the early access to this, well, become a member, please. You can look under the dash line of the description of this or any of my other videos and hit the links to memberships and it will tell you all about how you can join and what the perks are. Coco Chanel was way ahead of her time, and while the Bleu de Chanel is a relatively recent fragrance, one reason we sell fragrances when they're not necessarily old is because fragrances don't necessarily last, and this still smells very good and is virtually full. This is Eau de Parfum Bleu de Chanel. Coco Chanel was just so far ahead of her time. She is the one who changed styles after the First World War from corseted and very pretty and feminine, but very uptight and really quite awkward to wear, and changed everything into a much more casual, fun, less formal silhouette that could still be very beautiful and appropriate for a formal setting, but was more sporty and more fun and gave women a lot more freedom of movement. And so she should get more credit maybe than she does for actually revolutionizing the way women dressed. But her house became so famous because of her and did so well that it still exists. It still makes great products. This is a men's scent. It's aromatic and woody. Yes, just a little spicy as well. It was a long time before Chanel made anything for men. It wasn't really considered an important market for most fragrance makers until the 1960s, when Aramis for Men came out and was a huge success. And suddenly there was a realization that men like fragrances too, and men definitely sometimes need them. So if your man needs some, here's a whole bottle right here. It's a demonstration, it's a tester. It was not originally meant for sale, which is nice in a way because the testers tend to be larger bottles. So this is 3.4 ounces. This will last somebody a long, long time, even if you wear it every day. We are starting this at just $9.99 now. I would think that a bottle like this that has been used practically not at all and still smells good should probably sell somewhere in at least the $75 range, potentially more. This is not inexpensive at the perfume counter, and so this is another reason to put this online, is because we want to get it in the hands of someone who will use it and enjoy it, and then they can preserve the bottle for future generations. In modern times, we would look at this product and say, oh, look at the way they're co-opting surfing. But actually, the skateboard was a byproduct of the surfing craze. Skateboards first appeared as boxes or crates or boards that people put roller skate wheels on in the 1940s and 50s. And by the late 50s in California, it had become a really big thing to do because it was something that you could do during the downtime if the surf wasn't good. So there is actually a direct connection between surfing and skateboarding, and that's why skateboards started to look like little surfboards around 1960 when this one came out. This is the Roller Derby Safari 30. This would have been made sometime between about 1963 and 1965. The Beach Boys came out with this song Surfin' Safari, and of course they also had come out with Surfin' USA, where they talked about if everybody had an ocean across the USA, everybody would be surfing like California. Well, not everybody lived in California or any place that had good surf. So suddenly skateboarding became land surfing, and that was the origin of it, and it really exploded in the 1970s. Boards got a lot more sophisticated, started being made out of fiberglass and more flexible materials, and pretty soon people were doing tricks, and you had people like Ethan Hawke and skate parts sprouting up all over the place. So skateboards have become more and more popular since this very early and what we would think now is relatively primitive one. This has a nice STP logo too. Those were popular to stick on things in the early 60s. And it has good wheels, good trucks. It actually works pretty well. They were pretty basic. There's the roller derby wheels because a lot of the roller skating companies became the first skateboard companies. And then little mom and pop skateboard shops started producing, and now it is a multi-billion-dollar business. So from the humble early skateboards have come this really fun pastime that a lot of people really, really enjoy. And I think somebody's going to really enjoy this old wooden version. It's in pretty good shape, actually. It came from an estate here in Kentucky. And so, yes, you could surf on the sidewalk in Kentucky with one of these. And that was the idea. So the Safari 30. It's in pretty good shape. It didn't get ground too much on the nose. The trucks are all good. It's not cracked anywhere. These seem like they're pretty good sellers now. A lot of skateboarders like to have an early one in their collection just to show it off and show how primitive they were compared to what we think of as skateboarding now. But also they are fun for display with old toys and that sort of thing. So a few different collectors for these. You don't have to know how to do the front side grind, but it doesn't hurt. This one can roll into your house starting at $9.99, but we do have a buy it now of $100 because they do sell for that much now. So if you have an old skateboard that your kids left behind, or maybe your parents or grandparents left behind, well, don't just think that, oh, it's that old wooden kind and they don't want those anymore, because people do, just for different reasons. This next piece is really cool. It's also as tall as I am, so I'm going to have to show you in phases. And I think I have 8 or 9 of the other zodiac signs as well, because this is an original, unframed, unused, new old stock poster for the sign of Cancer during the craze about zodiac signs and astrology in the late 1960s. There is the crab. You notice the Art Nouveau style to it, and the colors are very psychedelic. The graphics are very much like what you're seeing in late 60s graphics. There is your sign. It's a moon sign, and there is your date, June 21 to July 22. So I figured it was topical because we are right in the sign of Cancer right now. It is an original. It is copyright 1969. It was done by a print company in San Francisco, and it even credits the designer, Bruce Krepting. It's a really cool piece. The problem is it's so big that it's hard to show. So you'll have to go on to the listing to actually see the whole thing. But I'm going to try to unroll it a little bit more so you at least get the idea, maybe in 3 parts. So there's the top, there is the middle section, and then here we have the bottom. This crazy typeface, this interesting Art Nouveau influence design, was very similar to what was being done on handbills for the Fillmore and other venues in Haight-Ashbury at the time. And part of the reason for that is that the hippies were interested in Art Nouveau design because it was kind of trippy looking. It wasn't totally literal. And it was something that the day-glow colors of the time actually looked good in and gave a lot of contrast. A lot of those people were living in old houses in San Francisco that the flight to the suburbs had left behind. It's hard to believe San Francisco was an inexpensive place to live at one time, but it was. And it had a lot of old housing stock built in the Art Nouveau time because of the San Francisco fire and earthquake that destroyed a lot of the housing, and it had to be redone. That's the reason you see a lot of Art Nouveau influence in late 1960s and early 1970s design, particularly graphic design like this. It's a really cool thing. I wish I could put all of them online, but I'm going to do this one now, and if people are interested in other signs, let me know what your sign is, baby, and maybe I can help you out. I think that was a pickup line back then. We're going to start this at $29.99. I don't really have a clear idea of what the value is on these because I haven't seen any sold, and I actually have never seen any other than the collection that I bought. So I am seeing things that I consider somewhat comparable. This thing is huge, selling for about $150. We will just find out together what the market on eBay bears for this now. I think it's a really fun piece, and if you have somebody who is a July baby, well, it might be something to get just in time for their celebration. We have a lot of fun stuff from the 60s this time, and this was lots of fun for whoever got hold of it first. This came from friends of mine in Idaho, was part of their collection, and it is the Cox RAF in the original box, ready to fly. It's been flown a couple of times. The condition overall is pretty good. The box is a little bit worn on the edges. The antenna on the plane has been broken off, as they almost all are. However, unlike most of these, we actually have that part, and so it can be put back on. I'm not going to glue it back on before I ship it because I want whoever gets this to see it in the condition that it is, and they can make the decision about how they repair it. Other than that, it does not seem to need any repairs. It doesn't look like it was flown a whole lot. It had some flight time, but the engine is really clean. And the other thing that's really neat about this piece, besides the fact that it's a really good-looking piece, is that it has the paperwork, and it's got lots of paperwork. It's got the paperwork trying to sell you on the idea of getting their closed-track gas-power racing cars, which were pretty neat looking. Look at the Corvette Stingray. What a beautiful car that is. This one has a cartoon illustration of how to get started with your Cox model plane and how easy it is to fly. Now, this is when these are still on a tether. They were not yet remote controlled entirely. And then this was made sometime around 1966, and only for a brief time because then the remote control started to come out shortly after that. And here is the official breakdown of how the engine comes apart, all the instructions and everything. It even has the original inspection tag, the quality control tag. So the fact that this was not smashed into a million pieces, it makes it one of a handful, I would say, at this point, of survivors. They sold thousands of these when they were new, but this one was only produced for a pretty brief time. It even has the dealer notice that this airplane is not guaranteed against crash damage, so don't crash the thing. Most people nowadays are just putting them out for display anyway. This same model sold recently in the same condition with the antenna broken, but not having the antenna piece to repair like this one does, for around $165, and my suspicion is that this one will too because it's so complete and has so much stuff. It's in very similar condition to the one that sold recently, and you just don't see them very often in any sort of condition. Usually they're pretty broken up. I have one other one that is just in pieces, really, and can only be sold for parts. So very happy to find this one. I would have loved to have had this when I was a kid. I remember my dad had a friend who had these, and they would go out and fly them, and I would get to watch, but I was too little to control the thing, and they knew, like the sign said, it's not guaranteed against crash damage, so I never actually got to fly one of these. And if it doesn't sell, well, then maybe this will be my chance, but I think it'll be gone. One other fun set of salt and pepper shakers this flight, and this one is Trader Vic's. You do see these time to time because Trader Vic's was such a popular establishment with such a great history. It started in the 1930s as a bar in San Francisco, and it was the Depression, and not everybody had money for drinks, so the bartender would allow you to trade some interesting flotsam or jetsam that you found on the beach for a cocktail once in a while, and they started decorating the bar in it. And that bartender and the owner of the bar was a gentleman by the name of Victor Bergeron, who quickly became known as Trader Vic's because he would trade you beachcomb stuff for a drink. So Trader Vic's became an institution. And then the war happened. A lot of people were stationed in Hawaii. A lot of people were exposed to Polynesian culture. A lot of people really loved their R&R and shore leave and the feel of all this. And so his motif quickly became a chain of lounges associated with fine hotels up and down the West Coast. In fact, the first place I had a drink when I turned 21 and could have a legal drink in Seattle, Washington was Trader Vic's. And I bought a Pim's cup, which is a very peculiar drink full of big chunks of vegetables that stick out of the top. It was more like eating a salad than having a cocktail. Trader Vic's is also known, of course, for having invented the Mai Tai, a very famous drink, and yes, that came from Trader Vic's too. There still are a number of Trader Vic's in operation. They haven't produced these salt and pepper shakers in many years. I believe these were made in Japan in the 1960s, 70s period, so you do have a plastic stopper. One is missing, but most people are just putting these out for decor anyway, and like the signs in the old salt and pepper boxes would say, oh, if we forgot to put a cork in it, just put tape over it. So funny that that was the recommendation, but I've actually seen slips of paper in old salt and pepper boxes that said that. These are going to start at $9.99. They typically sell for about $20 plus shipping. Another just for fun thing that takes us back is this. Who shot JR? Apparently I did, at least this says. This could be my mugshot. J.R. Ewing, if you were alive in 1980, even if you were a child and it was not something your parents would let you watch, you probably had heard of J.R. Ewing because the show Dallas was so incredibly popular. It was about a scheming oil baron and his family, and J.R. Ewing was not a nice man, played by Larry Hagman, who previously was mainly known for being Major Nelson on I Dream of Jeannie, so this was a very different role for him. This family was definitely a bit of a caricature. I mean, he was nasty and wore a big hat and was scheming and philandering and all sorts of things. And by the time the 1980 season was coming to a close, there were a lot of characters on that show who had good reason to shoot him. And one of them did. And that was the cliffhanger. And so for months until the next season came, everybody was wondering and speculating, well, who shot JR? Which character was it? And that's why these bumper stickers came to be, because maybe I did it. This was done by a place in Texas, you can see, as a novelty. So these were out for about 6 months. You could get pinback buttons that said, who shot JR, or I shot JR, or had a picture of him on it. It was a political campaign year, too. Some even said J.R. Ewing for president. Like we need that. And so it was a real cultural phenomenon. So much so that when the show came back on in November of 1980 and the cliffhanger was solved, 83 million people watched the episode. It's hard to believe now that that many people in this diffused age of media would watch a single show at the same time. So it was a huge, huge deal. I've even seen the iShot JR baseball caps sell recently for over $60. So there definitely is a collector who still remembers this. I don't really know what the bumper sticker should sell for. I haven't found any bumper stickers for sale online. It was never used, obviously. It's not on a car. It's on its original backing. It's in decent enough condition, but this is something that somebody who has memories of that time is going to keep as a souvenir, of course. So if you're a celebrity follower, this might be something for you. Or if you just want to proclaim your nastiness. It turned out that one of JR's mistresses was the one who shot him, by the way, and everybody agreed that she had good cause, and so he did not prosecute her in the show. He just had to come back from his wound. We're starting this at just $4.99. It's just a fun piece. I have a feeling the value is in the $15 to $20 range, and we'll find out together now. Next up is a title from the golden age of detective fiction, which took place pretty much between about 1940 and 1960. This is called I Heard the Death Bell, and it is by a woman named Charlotte Murray Russell. Charlotte Murray Russell was born in Rock Island, Illinois, and when she married after having graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Chicago, she decided to stop teaching, stop librarianship, and start writing. And she ended up being a very renowned mystery writer. Like many mystery writers, she wrote about various characters. This is one of 12 titles that has to do with the spinster Jane Amanda Edwards. Jane Amanda Edwards was a plump 40-ish woman who lived in Rockport, a fictional town in the Midwest, and she was sharp-minded and sharp-tongued, and always finding her way into crime and solving murders and mysteries. And this was published by Crime Club. Crime Club was part of Doubleday, and Crime Club was a really big deal for a long time. That division of Doubleday lasted from the 1920s to the mid-1990s. And in the golden era, they published many, many different authors, including Agatha Christie and some other really famous ones. But if you're a serious mystery collector, Charlotte Murray Russell will be familiar to you because she was considered quite a good author in her time. And this was actually from my mother's collection. I grew up with the Charlotte Murray Russell books around. My mom read them over and over, and this one's in pretty good condition considering that she read this one over and over too. It's got the dust jacket. Dust jackets really matter on these early mystery books because the dust jacket covered a very bland cover. The idea was that the dust jacket was going to be the thing that grabbed the attention of the reader and got them to buy the book. So the books with the dust jackets definitely more valuable than the ones without. We'll talk a little bit more about books in condition again. One thing that you need to disclose if you're selling a book that has been in a library is that it is ex libris, meaning it is a former library book, and this one has the Midwest Library stamp in it. This one again has a cracked spine, as you see. It also has some fading, some soiling along the top edge. These are somewhat technical terms. Book buyers expect you to use these terms in your listings if you know about books. There is a little bit of staining on a few pages. You know, these were meant to be bought and read, and, you know, people are on their lunch break and they smudge it a little bit or that sort of thing. They were not meant to be pristinely kept and never open. It's what we would call a good intact reading copy. Like, you won't feel like you shouldn't open this because it's so perfect, but it's not going to fall apart on you, and it's a good solid book with a good cover and a good graphic. It'll look fun on your shelf. And so for all those reasons, they're pretty popular, and she's a pretty popular writer. She wrote until 1953, and then she retired from writing and went back to being a librarian at the Rock Island Library. And she worked there until she retired and lived to be 93. She died on her 93rd birthday. She was long-lived, and the stories that she told were pretty long-lived too. There are definitely people in this modern era who really love reading mysteries from the golden era of mystery fiction. And that's why we're going to put this on. In this condition, this probably is a $50 book. We're going to start it at $9.99. We'll probably do a buy it now around the $50 price. And it could be a great read by your bedside, or something that just keeps you up all night because it looks a little scary. A lot of people are familiar with Lenox china. Not as many people have heard of Castleton China, but those who are in the know realize that Castleton China, along with Syracuse and a few other American companies, also made very nice dinnerware patterns that were high quality and not inexpensive when new. Lenox was the China of the White House originally, but Castleton eventually became the White House China. And in conjunction with the bicentennial, they ended up releasing an entire series of plates based on the services that various presidents had had over time. This one is number 254 of a limited edition of 2,500. All of them were limited to 2,500, and this is based on John Quincy Adams' pattern. Now, of course, back then, they were getting their china from England and overseas. They were not getting it from the United States because we didn't have china makers at that time, but eventually we caught up. I thought this was a very pretty pattern, and I bought 4 different presidential plates all in the same place. They all seem to be selling for about $25 each, except this one that went for $50. I think this one's harder to find, or there were just multiple people looking for it at one time. Of course, when something goes for a certain amount on eBay, the question is, will the next one sell for the same amount, or will the next customer not whine it quite as badly? So we're going to find out together. It's a little bit of an experiment. I think it's very attractive nonetheless, and there are collectors for these, and we are right on the cusp of July 4th, so we'll see. Maybe somebody will need this for their July 4th dinner, in which case I'll have to send it overnight. This next piece, I want to thank my friends Susan and Janet up in Michigan. They were very kind to give this to me. I made a nice purchase from them, and they gave me a bunch of gifts as go-alongs, and this was one of them. And I was really excited about it. I don't think they had a customer where they were, and they understood it, and they understood why. There is Chico, the Santa Fe Navajo boy, who is etching Santa Fe into the sand as the Super Chief diesel train goes by. We know this is from the 1950s because it's a diesel train. Diesel trains appear in the late 1940s and substituted for the old steam engines, and were quickly adopted because they were more efficient and could go farther and had a lot more power. There's the 50 states, and in the middle of it you see the route map of the Santa Fe, which went from Chicago all the way to San Francisco and Los Angeles and down to Texas. The Santa Fe was a very important railroad for being in the middle of the country and linking a lot of the coastal railroads together and the southern railroads together, and that's why it eventually was absorbed by the Burlington Northern and today is Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. The silver is in good shape. That's really important on these. I have never seen this piece before, and I'm kind of a railroad buff, and I've seen a lot of railroadiana. I've known dealers who specialized in it, and I've never run into this one, so I think it's actually kind of scarce. We are starting it at just $9.99, and we are not doing a buy it now on this, because this is one of these things, when I have something that there's no recent comps for, I realize you can go to WorthPoint and maybe you can find an old comparable sale, and it might be a year old or 2 years old or 3 years old. Sometimes that's important to know, and sometimes it's just not relevant for today. And I feel like with this piece, what's relevant is what someone will be willing to pay for it now. So we're just going to let the market tell us that, and we're going to find out starting now. We're going to drop this listing and see where it goes. One more really fun book I wanted to share with you this month is this one. It's Little Lulu and Her Pals. This is a pretty early Little Lulu. It says by Marge. Marge stands for Marjorie Buell, who was the illustrator. She was hired to do Little Lulu because the comic strip Henry, that had a boy who didn't really have any dialogue and everything was just through expression, had been very successful in the Saturday Evening Post and was elevated to a national comic strip. So they wanted to replace him, and Marge came up with the idea of Little Lulu, who originally also did not speak. And she decided on a girl instead of a boy because she thought a girl could get away with some of these things that she depicted without seeming so boorish. And she thought that a boy might seem mean-spirited doing the same things Little Lulu did. Although Little Lulu's first cartoon was pretty mean-spirited. It came out in the Saturday Evening Post in 1935. And it showed her walking as the ring bearer down the aisle in front of a wedding party and throwing banana peels on the floor, and the bride slipping and flying up in the air. So Little Lulu, whose name was Lulu Moppet officially, was sometimes a little mischievous. I think this is a cute book because it's got great illustrations with something that they like to do before full color was really affordable. A lot of times they would tint where you would see various red and crimson tones in order to get an idea of the color and to bring more dimension to the figures. They started to be released in these books by David McKay Company around the 1940s, and this particular one is a second edition from 1939. So this is a pretty early one. Interestingly enough, Marge the illustrator became rather popular and famous for doing this, but she only drew Little Lulu until the late 1940s, and then she retired from it and it was turned over to other illustrators and other syndicates who then gave her a voice. And so Little Lulu cartoons and comic books later had dialogue. Dust jackets definitely do add value, and this one does have a dust jacket, which I will include, but the dust jacket is in pieces. However, I didn't want to throw it away because it at least still exists, and somebody might be willing to tape it together, restore it, have something just to have it with the book. So don't toss these. Don't assume that people won't want them because the condition is bad, because the condition of the book is good, and someone will probably want the dust jacket to go with it. As far as the condition of the book, again, a little bit of bumping, as they call it, on the spine, a little bit in the corners, a little bit of very light soiling on it. She doesn't have any foxing. Foxing is where a mold starts to affect paper. It's usually when things have been stored in a bad climate without air conditioning and that sort of thing. And it'll look like these little spots here. These little spots are actually from the adhesive used in making the book, but foxing is actually a mold, and you'll start to see specks on prints and paper and artwork. And once that mold gets in, it has to be fumigated to get it out, and it can be rather expensive. So foxing is definitely not something preferred with book collectors, but a lot of old books have it because they were issued at a time when there was no climate control and they just sat in the humidity like everybody else. Overall, this is in pretty good condition. You know, there's a little bit of small riffling to some of the pages where they were turned. You know, kids use these books. So the fact that this is in this condition is actually pretty good. I think someone will really enjoy it. It should sell for about $30. We're just going to start it at $9.99 and let it climb to where it should for whoever is in the mood for a little light levity. New York City has hosted 2 World's Fairs. We had a souvenir from the first one, and here we have some press releases and some really fun correspondence from the second one. This is from the Ford Motor Company Pavilion. It was very popular with the car companies to set up a pavilion and show their cars of the future and talk about all the things that they thought would be interesting features that would come about on cars. 2 years before this, in 1962, the Seattle World's Fair, the Ford company showed what was going to be a nuclear-powered car. That was their idea for 1962. That future didn't happen. Can you imagine what would happen in an accident with a nuclear-powered car? I shudder to think. In 1964, the Ford Motor Company had some different displays, and we'll look inside to see a little more about them, but it's got the official World's Fair postmark there from Flushing, New York. Cost 18 cents to send this because it was a lot of stuff, and it went airmail. It was sent by the woman in this press release. This is Jean Parsons. Jean Parsons was a young woman working at the New York World's Fair. She was hired by the Ford Pavilion, and this shows her on Kentucky Day, and here's the news release that goes with it, talking all about how she is giving the first fellow from Kentucky that day a promotional car, which is a radio. We sell those for about $45 or $50 now. Those are the 1964 Thunderbird models that were turned into radios by Ford. So she was involved with the PR and the promotion. Mr. Arnold Hershkovitz, age 20, receives a Philco radio in the shape of a Thunderbird car from Ford hostess Jean Parsons, a former resident of Lexington, Kentucky. The reason I got this is because she actually had moved by then to Seattle, and I got this at an estate in Seattle, and nobody looked at it. This is an interesting thing, folks. If you're seeing a bunch of old paper ephemera in a stack at an estate sale, and you've got the time, take a little time to go through it, because as soon as I saw that this was World's Fair and car related, I was like, wow, double collectible, and it has photos. So I just grabbed the whole thing and didn't read the correspondence, which is fantastic. I'll read some of it to you in a minute. There is Jean Parsons in an actual Ford convertible, and you see people in the background there. She's pictured with a couple of dignitaries. Looks like they're about to take a fun ride. And a fun ride she had indeed, because they let her take some of the stationery home and write some letters back to family. I am having a really great time here. Last week I went to Coney Island on our 2 days off, and I'm having a marvelous time with a fellow I'm dating. He's from New York University. Then she goes on, she didn't send the letter at first, this is June 3rd, then June 9th. She says, oh, my boat trip was the greatest time in the whole world. The fellow I went with was the nicest and most darling, and this is a different fellow. So 6 days later, well, the guy from the university is out and the guy with the boat is in. We went on a 56-foot yacht, and I caught 17 fish and outfished everybody. Isn't it funny how fickle girls are? 1 minute is interested in one person, and later then it is interested in another. It's a shame. Really, though, this fellow is sharp, and I'd like to get to know him better. So that's fellow number 2. Then we're at June 17th. She apparently didn't send these letters. She just wrote one a week until she finally got enough of them and put them in a packet. Last week I went to Boston on my days off to the Harvard graduation with a fellow I've been dating off and on ever since high school. She gets around. I returned home with a cold due, I guess, to lack of sleep and rest, and probably a little wrong and evil living included. But what fun. My birthday was on Monday, and my nutty sweet roomies gave her a beautiful set of Channel 5 perfume. Which is kind of funny considering we just had Channel perfume on this broadcast. So my job now is permanent as the secretary to the public relations director of the Ford Pavilion at the fair, and I really love it. So she's having a great time. She's working her way up. She's living the life of a young woman who is in a huge world city at a huge world event for the first time, and it's just really joyous and fun to read. So whoever gets this will be able to read the full detailed description of her events in New York for the World's Fair. I just thought this was really fun. It's multiply collectible. It is World's Fair. It is automobile related, and it's old correspondence. And you know, people send emails now. Everything can be deleted. Everything can disappear. But in the old days, it was all committed to paper, and we still have it. So there are people collecting. So this is really a triple threat. It's triple collectible. We are going to start this at $9.99. And again, this is not one that really is appropriate for a buy it now, because this is specific to this person and their experience. There is not another one exactly like it anywhere. So how do you value that? Sometimes you just put it out there and you let the collectors tell you what it's worth to them. And that's how you know. So that's what we're going to do. The next items I have to show you are from the 1990s. And that's not terribly old. It's just old enough to be vintage in my book. But they're really fun, and they are droll. In fact, they are definitely droll because they are droll designs. And there is our mark. There are a few different droll design marks because there appear to be a number of people, and it is still going as a concern, who have worked for droll designs over the years. It seems to be a consortium of a number of studio potters in the Marblehead, Massachusetts area. Marblehead has a pottery tradition, believe it or not. It's not just a high-tech corridor in a wealthy sea town in Massachusetts. It's also a place that had Marblehead pottery, which is very collectible, by the way. If you see any of those pieces from the 1920s and prior, grab onto those. And so I thought that it was interesting that these herald from the same town. These are anthropomorphic candlesticks, and, well, they're anatomical, yes. I wouldn't say that they're prurient exactly, but they're certainly fun and interesting, and you do a double take when you look at them at first, and then you see the detail. And if your very prudish aunt comes over, you can turn them around this way, and they're just lovely little white candlesticks with black decoration. So, see, everybody gets to be happy. These came out at some point in the 1990s. When I've seen them for sale online, it always seems to be one or the other. It doesn't seem like, for some reason, they stayed in pairs very well. And that's the reason I thought it was worth putting them on, because I haven't seen any sell recently as a pair. Nowadays, the studio has really evolved to an all-encompassing, all-over design of fruit and flowers, and those seem to be the directions that they've taken. So I believe these to be pretty early pieces for the studio, which has been in business, like I say, since the early 1990s. This is something I thought would be interesting for us to see together, what they sell for when there's both of them. The individual ones seem to be selling between $25 and $35. So I have hopes that these could sell for a pretty good number. And they're also nice because they're a good height. They're certainly odd and interesting in a way that made me smirk. So I think someone else will get a kick out of them too. Well, we've certainly talked a lot about the world in this particular episode, and this is a tour of the world. If you couldn't go to the World's Fair, you could have the World's Fair or the world come to you. This is part of a series, I believe there were a dozen, called the Stereographic Library Tour of the World. Each one, they look like little books on a shelf that are leather bound, but when you open them up, they are actually stereo cards. This turns out to be a false binding. This is a box, and the set of stereo cards lives within. This one actually is more than complete because it has these that are used to set the optics so that your eyes are focusing correctly. And so those are kind of a neat extra bonus that are in there. But there are 100 cards that show all sorts of scenes from all around the world. There's New York again. These were done about 1920. This is pretty close to the end of the stereo cards. Stereo cards, you needed a viewer, and you adjusted it on a stick. It looks like sort of a metal helmet that covers your eyes. This is a pretty good example. The way stereo viewers work, notice these two pictures are the same picture, but one of them is cropped a little closer to the left than the other. So they're the same picture, but they're not really identical images. And the reason for that is what they call parallax. When your eyes see this through the viewer at a little bit of distance, your eyes are fooled by the fact that the pictures are the same, but they're a little bit different. So the one eye tries to adjust a little bit to make them seem the same. And in doing that, it creates a 3D effect. So this is what the original Viewmaster looked like. And there were thousands of stereo cards made. Just this series alone, if you add all 12 volumes, is about 1,200 different cards. Sears and Roebuck had a series of 100 that you could buy that was their factory. Here's a view of boating on the canals in the Netherlands. This is the Palace of Justice in Belgium. For those of you who collect these and have a viewer, you'll know that some of these things, like bringing in the sheaths, that might not seem like a terribly interesting subject when you're just looking at it with the naked eye, actually makes a really good 3D view. There are also series of these that show the damage and destruction from the San Francisco earthquake, the St. Louis flood of 1904. I know that because I collect the natural disasters. I collect the Florida-related ones, early Alaska. I have certain ones that are interesting to me. My grandfather had an old stereo viewer, and when he passed on, I got it and I started collecting so I'd have something to look at. And there's so many available that I decided to pick certain themes. But a lot of people, what they do is they attempt to get all of these different two-part volumes. And like I say, I believe there's 6 of them. I think I have 5 of the 6 currently. There's the kangaroos. It's just a fun way to see the whole world as it was around 1920 in one big box full of fun. Individually, I sell these cards for about $3 a piece, and this unfortunately is one of these things where they're worth more dead than alive. There are certain stereo cards that are quite valuable, by the way. I sold one at an estate sale for $250 because it depicted a mining town in Colorado. They made the stereo card, then the photographer's studio was burnt down in a fire, all the negatives were lost, and then the town disappeared and went away because the mine got played out. And it is the only view of that town in existence. And so not all stereo cards are $3 items, but I sell a lot of them for $3 a piece. That would make this $300. This will not sell for $300. It'll probably sell somewhere between $50 and $100. So if you like these and like to collect them, buying these compendiums especially when you can find all the pieces in them intact like this, is a great way to build your collection. If you're interested in these, this might be the time to collect now while the prices are low and these old collections are coming onto the market, because once they disappear, we'll be back to the way things were before, where you have to buy them individually. And that brings us to our last item, and isn't it a beauty? I am very partial to this. This is an art glass studio piece by a very well-known art glass creator by the name of Stuart Ableman. Stuart Ableman sounds like a nerdy, bookish kind of person, but Stuart Ableman actually was a big blonde hippie who ended up studying art glass about the time that a lot of people got interested in studio glass again. And just like I was mentioning about the graphics on the big poster, the Art Nouveau styles in glass, especially the iridescence, like Tiffany would do with the Favril, and eventually the Carnival glass makers followed. Well, that became very interesting to studio glass makers in the 1970s again. And he came up with this line of Jack-in-the-Pulpit vases. Lots of glass companies make Jack-in-the-Pulpit vases because they're such an interesting shape, and you can do them in a lot of ways. Pilgrim has one that's a little flatter and lips up and lips out at the bottom. Fenton Glass has made Jack-in-the-Pulpit. A lot of different companies have, and this is one of his trademarks. These iridized pieces come in various colors, but I haven't seen a lot in this black amethyst with the iridizing on it. You can see that the date of this one is 1994. He started in 1976 on his own in a studio. He originally was a glass instructor at a college in California, and he was having such a good time making the things that he decided to take the risk and go out on his own. And this is about the same time as Orient and Flume is starting in California, and Sterini Art Glass is getting going. A lot of different people were motivated to start making Art Nouveau influenced glass styles. These typically sell now for around $150 a piece, and I would not be surprised if this sold for that, because I think it's just a beautiful piece. They come in various sizes. This is actually one of the smaller sizes at 9 inches. He is still producing today. Instead of long flowing blonde hair and a mustache, he has long flowing gray hair and a mustache, but it really looks like he and his love for glass have not changed much at all in 50 years. So it's exciting that he is still producing, because so many glassblowers of his era have retired at this point. This piece is 30 years old, so it is truly vintage, and that makes it okay in my book. I think it's very pretty, and we're going to start it at $95, but I do believe that it will run up from there, because it is a very pretty piece by a well-respected art glass maker. It was so fun for me to get to talk to you about all these things, tell you a little bit more about them, talk about why people collect them and find them interesting, share some of these oddball stories and things from my family, and just have a great time with you. So thank you for giving me the pleasure of this, and I hope that these things give you some pleasure too, and if they give you a lot of pleasure, well, go to the links below and you can take a look and see if they're still available on eBay. And we'll follow up to let you know how all these things fared in the market, so that we can all learn together that way too. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video, and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help, and we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.